Welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we report the truth about American exceptionalism. We love our flag, we love our country, and we believe in America. The Definitive Wrap, where we respect people of faith, the men and women in blue, and our support for Israel. And now your hosts, Bela Sebro, she's the nice one, and Alan Skorsky. He's not so nice. But together they are The Definitive Wrap.
I'm Alan Skorsky with my co-host Bela Sebro, and welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we discuss the news items the mainstream media just won't touch. The Definitive Wrap is proud to be the official podcast of VinNews.com. We are now 2 months into the Biden administration, with Democrats still seething over not having been able to impeach Donald Trump for a second time following the violence on January 6th. While that political theater is still fresh in the minds of millions, many Americans have forgotten about the first impeachment attempt against President Trump for basically not being a nice guy. In his book, Abuse of Power, Inside the 3-Year Campaign to Impeach Donald Trump, our distinguished guest and brilliant author Fred Lucas, whom Bela will introduce shortly, takes the readers through the illegitimate process and questionable tactics the Democrats and media used to try to remove Donald Trump even before he was sworn in. I'm sure today's discussion will be as riveting as his book. Bela, I know you had some comments as well.
Thank you, Alan. The left were very unhappy with the results of the 2016 election, and they didn't try to hide that either. So they needed to do what needed to be done by whatever it takes. The problem is that when people allow personal feelings and emotions to overtake, it causes great havoc. And when you're dealing with a constitutional government, it can get dangerous. And that's what we are talking about here today. Donald Trump's enemies set out to remove him from office even before his inauguration, which ended, as everyone knows, in an election year impeachment trial. Here with us today is Fred Lucas, the Chief National Affairs Correspondent for the Daily Signal, an award-winning journalist and veteran White House correspondent. Lucas, who has written and reported for Fox News, National Review, Newsmax, The Blaze, Town Hall, The Washington Examiner, The Federalist, The National Interest, History Magazine Quarterly, The American Spectator, The American Conservative, and other outlets. Before going to Washington, he reported on state capitals in Kentucky and Connecticut. He earned his master's at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and bachelor's at Western Kentucky University. Fred, welcome to the Definitive Wrap.
Thanks for having me on.
You wrote about the inside 3-year campaign to impeach Donald Trump in a book titled Abuse of Power. Your book is fascinating, and the details, yes. And the details are surreal, because what you wrote about is how the facts evolved. And you really exposed the events leading up to Trump's impeachment, beginning with Democrats' resistance to his presidency from the beginning, all the way through the Senate vote that kept Trump in office. So let's start from when Elizabeth Warren tried to set an impeachment trap for Trump even before his inauguration. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the chapters in the book is called Resistance Before Day One. And that's basically that before the inauguration, on some level, even before Election Day, though almost nobody thought he was going to win the election in 2016. So they weren't as worried. It was more of an academic exercise. But after the election, there was this full-blown effort to look into impeaching him. Elizabeth Warren put together a bill. She got a few Senate co-sponsors, including Tim Kaine, who was on the losing presidential ticket that year with Hillary Clinton, to basically demand that Trump divest his holdings and using the emoluments clause. And the bill specifically said if he did not, this would constitute a high crime or misdemeanor under the Constitution, which, of course, high crime misdemeanor is synonymous with impeachment. So they were basically setting them in motion, plans to impeach Donald Trump from the very beginning. This was December 2016, early December 2016. this bill came out. It had no chance of passing really, but it was something that set the Democrats on course. After that, you had several House members and this whole web of various nonprofits that I call Impeach 45 Inc., which was people, Tom Steyer, George Soros groups, and so forth, 1630 Fund types, Arabella groups that were raising money off the concept of impeaching Trump. And constantly sending out emails to their followers, let's impeach Trump, chip in $5, that type of thing. And so it became both a monetary and a political thing to push forward. This whole time, however, I would say that Nancy Pelosi, she came in as minority leader in 2017. She didn't want to talk about impeachment. She thought that would scare voters away. Her goal was to win a majority. And the book, Abuse of Power, is almost as much about Pelosi as it is Trump, and how there was this complete collapse of leadership on her part, how she eventually became just bullied by the far left wing in her caucus.
So, Fred, one of the, as I followed the, the impeachment process as well, we saw people like Eric Swalwell, who I swear when Tucker Carlson used to have him on, it was intentional just to show America what a dope this guy is. There's no other reason to have him on as a guest. And we saw also Adam Schiff regularly come on TV on the different shows and say, the evidence is clear, it's there for anyone to see. Now, I want to ask, how could they have gotten away with this? But it almost sounds like too naive of a question. But I guess that's my question. You go on TV, you're a lawyer. You swear, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution, and you're telling America that you have evidence that never existed. So how did they, I guess, where did they go from there, and how did they get away with it?
Yeah, this was particularly with Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff would go on talk shows, Meet the Press, various other cable news shows, and basically say, when sometimes the host would push him on this about, do you have evidence of collusion? And he sort of spake repeatedly, well, I'm privy to so much information as a member of the Intelligence Committee, and there is solid evidence out there of collusion with Russia. And I mean, that's something he was never really held accountable. I mean, Adam Schiff, and the book Abuse of Power, it really documents how he's told so many lies from the moment Trump came into office throughout. I mean, and public. I mean, and it was not difficult to find areas where Adam Schiff lied. Now he's trying to be the Attorney General of California, hoping he gets that Becerra seat. Right. So because that's usually been a pretty good stepping stone, as you see from Kamala Harris. But this was not the only problem. I mean, Adam Schiff, though, he took command. He wanted to run the impeachment early on. And a big part of this book is how he really edged out Jerry Nadler. Jerry Nadler is the guy who was naturally, as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, was naturally supposed to run an impeachment proceeding. Schiff basically pushed him aside, worked his connections with Nancy Pelosi, and also some of the weaknesses that Nadler had in previous hearings, and really commandeered the process. The Judiciary Committee had sort of a very token role, and after the Schiff's committee, the Intel Committee had their hearings, then it went to Judiciary for the sort of token vote as to what the articles of impeachment would be. But yeah, I mean, Adam Schiff entirely took it over, and then they had Schiff and Nadler had a very public rivalry during the impeachment trial in 2020, and it was comical at times. Some people might remember that foot race that they had, in which and others might remember press conferences with the House managers, in which Nadler would be speaking, and then Schiff would interrupt and take over, and so forth. So yeah, this was not a well put together team. What's interesting, I think, is if you look at the first impeachment set of impeachment managers and the second set of impeachment managers with Trump's trials, 2 Senate trials. The first team with Schiff and Nadler and some of these other folks were they were sort of Zoe Lofgren. Those were sort of A-listers among House Democrats. The next impeachment, Jamie Raskin, he's pretty much on the B team, and it was largely, kind of second tier House Democrats that were running the second impeachment. But I think they actually did a much better job, and at least in presenting, presentation wise, they did a much better job than the Schiff team.
Well, they had a lot of video to go with it, and they were more focused on, again, editing. We had spoken earlier with David Schoen, one of the Trump's defense lawyers, and he said that, the Democrats basically, they brought in a movie crew to take all the videos and just kind of cut and paste to make it look, Donald Trump called for violence, sure.
Fred, in your book, you take apart previous impeachments as opposed to the impeachment charges against Donald Trump. Can you explain the previous impeachments and how was this one different?
Well, yeah, the fatal flaw in the first Trump impeachment certainly was that it is the only presidential impeachment not based on some allegation of breaking the law. The charges were abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Literally, you could charge almost any president with
abuse
those.
Of power is a very broad spectrum.
It's so vague. You could easily have charged Barack Obama with abuse of power for enacting DACA without Congress. You could have charged him with obstruction of Congress for declaring privilege over the Fast and Furious documents.
Right.
So, the same could probably be said of many, many other presidents who clashed with Congress. That's basically the 2 charges were abuse of power means Congress didn't like him, the Democrats didn't like him. Obstruction of Congress was he didn't do what they told him to do. And it was all predicated. They needed a predicate, so they grabbed onto this Ukraine phone call, which I think most people agree almost no president would ever be impeached for that. This was an impeachment looking for a reason. And what I did with this book, I didn't just pontificate. I looked into, I interviewed people within the White House, on Capitol Hill, all through, try to get as many sides as possible on this.
It's very clear that you didn't just write fiction here.
Right, and often off the record, on background, people say what happened behind the scenes, what was going on here, the rivalries where people clash. But we did say this was built up. I mentioned emoluments in the Liz Warren case. They thought that was low-hanging fruit. That didn't really work out. They moved to Russia. They tried at some point Stormy Daniels. They wanted to impeach him for that. None of those things really worked, particularly after the Mueller report came out on Russia and cleared him on that. And then, we've got this. Let's move this. We're never going to have another chance like this. And Pelosi was, she had been so cornered basically by the squad at that point that she felt like she had to move. But back to your original question there. Looking at the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, that was, a lot of historians look down on that, but that actually stands up much better than the first Trump impeachment, which was they went after Johnson. The Republicans actually went after Johnson for violating the Tenure of Office Act. That was later ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, but at the time it was a duly enacted law. You fast forward, most people agree on the Nixon impeachment that almost happened before he resigned.
Right.
There were multiple felonies involved in that and so forth with Watergate. Go forward to the Clinton impeachment. That was clearly obstruction of justice, which was an actual felony, unlike obstruction of Congress, and perjury. There was not a lot of debate whether he did those things. The debate in Congress in the late 90s was whether it constituted an impeachment, whether it rose to the level of removing an elected official from office. Then you have the first Trump impeachment. They couldn't think of, like, what does Democrats went through several iterations as to what they were going to try to impeach Trump for. At one point, they said they were going to impeach him for bribery for this Zelensky phone call. And then it was never clear whether they were accusing him of bribing Zelensky or Zelensky bribing Trump. And then they ran focus groups, Democrats, as to what we should charge Trump with. The public didn't buy that it was bribery. Extortion, maybe, but they didn't quite see that either. So they went with these vague charges and sort of filled in the blanks as they went along in the Senate trial. What you can say about the second impeachment of Trump, and you can argue on the merits of their case, but at least this did not have that same fatal flaw of the first impeachment of Trump. They impeached him in the House for incitement to insurrection, which would actually be a crime. There are laws in the books against both insurrection and incitement. So, I mean, that is something that this second impeachment at least had going for it that the first impeachment did not. Whether they could actually prove that case, since the president said march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, that's a separate question entirely. But the Trump impeachment, the first one in 2019, was the only presidential impeachment that did not allege a crime. And importantly, of all of the federal judges that were impeached and removed from office, all were impeached over the allegation of committing a crime. There were, I think, maybe a couple that were non-criminal impeachments, and those did not get through. So the tradition and the understanding is that it should require a crime or something equivalent to a crime, an attack on the nation in some way. That does not, because there was this argument during the presidential impeachment of Trump that, well, it doesn't specifically require a statutory crime. And there was this old Gerald Ford quote about, it's whatever a majority of the House believes it is impeachable, is impeachable. I make the point in this book, Abuse of Power, that Gerald Ford was a very good man, a person of high moral character. He was trying to impeach Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, who was pretty much a moral reprobate at the time, right, in the 1970s. And but at the same time, I think that Gerald Ford was just absolutely wrong on that point, to say that an impeachable offense is whatever a House majority believes it to be. That allows you that opens the door for all sorts of things, even beyond. It could allow you to impeach someone for someone's race or religion or any other thing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Fred, you mentioned in the book, you cited Peter Schweitzer's research into the Bidens and the Heinzes and all their Chinese deals. You cited interviews with The Intercept. I mean, you really delved in very, very deep. And I'm just wondering, when you first started writing your book, every author has a format of, starting from point A until they get to the end. Did you see the whole Chinese deal with Hunter Biden in your original thesis? Or is that something that developed later as you were researching and documenting the Al Greens and the Squads and the Elizabeth Warrens? Where did the whole chapter about Biden, and there were a few about Biden and all his, dirty tricks with China coming into it? How did that come into your research when you first started writing?
Well, the chapter that deals, I think, most with Biden of all is titled "The Triggers," chapter 9, but it gets into really what happened here and sort of how a Joe Biden scandal turned into a Trump impeachment. And it does detail, just as painstakingly as possible, all these issues and the perks and privilege of being Hunter Biden for one, but also why it wasn't just a Hunter Biden scandal. It was a Joe Biden problem because of based on how much Joe Biden knew about this, to the degree that he tried to stop an investigation of his son out of Ukraine, and to what degree he was involved in China. Now, since this book was published, we found out more about Hunter Biden's dealings with China, and certainly there were things that occurred after Biden was those 4 years he was a private citizen, having meetings and so forth with some of Hunter's business associates. So I think this book, Abuse of Power, I think it is a good basis to get sort of a primer on those relationships, like the Bidens and China, and some other far-flung international interests that are very closely aligned with the president's son, and to some degree the president himself now.
Right. Nancy, I wanted to ask you, Nancy Pelosi's intense dislike for Donald Trump is no secret. She doesn't even try to sugarcoat it or be politically correct. Why did she go all in against Trump?
Well, she did, as I mentioned early on, she did sort of resist it in the beginning. She was tepid. She didn't never liked it. But she was afraid too much impeachment talk from Al Green and others that were pushing this would scare voters away in 2018. She wanted it to be about healthcare and so forth. And but even after they got the majority, she did worry that it wasn't going anywhere. She knew that the numbers were not there in the Senate. But for a time, she actually tried to appease her caucus. And I talked to some people within Congress, staffers and so forth, about what happened here. She went with this strategy of impeachment light, where she was sort of pushing there would be contempt of Congress charges against a whole slew of Trump cabinet officials, and with be it Pompeo or be it the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and so forth, and that didn't really appease the beast. I mean, they were demanding more, and this particularly this came to head, I think, with the Squad. The Squad not only intimidated Pelosi, and it's rather shocking how this happened. This group of 4 House freshmen. But they not only intimidated Pelosi, but they intimidated most of the other House moderates and even liberals. I mean, there was never a time when Nancy Pelosi would be viewed as a moderate, but compared to the Squad, maybe so, at least less radical. And or she, at least Pelosi didn't openly talk about socialism. But there was and the Squad didn't back up. Pelosi wasn't used to being challenged in public by her caucus. She was pretty much had a good handle on her caucus, and it didn't work out this time so well. They publicly challenged her on Twitter. They went after her on talk shows and so forth. And AOC at one point raised the specter of her being racist. That she was attacking women of color. Right. One point I make in this book is that the wise thing to do probably would have been for Trump to just stand back and let this Democrat civil war. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not. To just stand back and watch them implode. He couldn't do that. He jumped in. On some level, he took Pelosi's side, and which is, of course, the death warrant for Pelosi and her caucus. So and he went after the Squad in some tweets. After that, Pelosi totally jumped in to defend the Squad. It was almost her ticket out. Trump gave her a way out because she was in real trouble with her caucus, with her very hardcore party base, and at that point, it was a way for her to keep her leadership post. But also after that, she knew that she couldn't back down from these demands for impeachment any longer.
Fred, I want to ask you a question. This is something that has always bothered me. In 2012, at the Nuclear Security Summit, the infamous hot mic between Barack Obama and Dmitry Medvedev, and I got the the hot mic quote verbatim, where Obama says, "This is my last election. After the election, I'll have more flexibility." To which Medvedev replies, "Yes, yes, I understand. I will transmit this information to Vladimir." How the heck did this not become the biggest news story, something that has impeachment written all over? I mean, you talk about, the 4 years of Russian collusion against Trump, and right here you caught the president on a hot mic saying, after my election, and pretty arrogant that he knew he would win, that have more flexibility. How did that never have the legs of what the charges that were made against Donald Trump?
I think largely because it was Trump, and there was not a full-fledged, all-in effort to impeach Obama from the moment he came in office. There's not. I don't know that there has been with anyone. I made some comparisons in the book with Clinton. I don't think there was the same effort, but I think there was a movement and a zeal to impeach Clinton because of his character issues, because of so many corruption issues mounted with Bill Clinton, and maybe a few parallels with Trump on that. But yeah, I mean, certainly when there is a will to impeach, a strong will to impeach, and you finally get to this breaking point where the leadership has to get behind it, and that played a major role. If you look at the timeline, this feud between Pelosi and the squad, that the squad actually won, that was very key. And it's not just the squad. The squad sort of represented the far left progressive caucus within the Democratic Party, but they were the most visible. And once they won, then it was clear that Pelosi had to move, and she felt like, well, this came up. Maybe it's sort of a national security issue, so maybe we can move on it from that basis. And from there they ran with it. What I did make the argument in the book, if you look at some sort of parallel, what if Barack Obama had talked to a foreign leader about investigating Mitt Romney's sons or something like that in the 2011, before the election coming up, there's almost that might lead to congressional oversight. I think you might have seen someone like Darrell Iss's committee look into that. I think the media response to that would have been the New York Times and CNN expressing outrage that the Republicans are trying to cover up Mitt Romney's sons in order to go after Barack Obama. And that's what we had in this case.
Right.
How did, if you can go into detail, please, and explain it, how did Adam Schiff push Jerry Nadler out of the key spot to lead the impeachment? So if you can just detail that, please.
Yeah, sure. Well, there had been essentially Nadler had sort of declared a impeachment inquiry, which was a bit of a joke to start with, because Pelosi had never endorsed that. But this happened right after the Mueller report. They couldn't get him on Russia, but they thought maybe we can say he obstructed justice, something along those lines. Yeah. And they had a string of hearings. Nadler did really horrible in those hearings, performed very badly. You might remember the Cornyn-Lewandowski hearing, also the Mueller hearing when they brought Mueller. Mueller, his own performance didn't help, so it's not all Nadler's fault. But those hearings, and after that, Pelosi just sort of saw. And there were a couple other hearings, I think, with federal prosecutors, and none of those did Nadler do very well. Those were sort of strike one, strike two, and strike three for Nadler. At the same time, according to sources on the Hill, you had Schiff had been sort of whispering to Pelosi, pushing this, that he's not up to this challenge. He's not fit for this. If we're actually going to make a case to the public, I need to be doing this. I used to be a federal prosecutor. I ran these intelligence hearings, and I'm good on the talk show circuit. Pelosi went along with this. As you might remember, she unilaterally declared an impeachment inquiry right after the Ukraine story broke, and she put like half a dozen different House committees in charge, just so they would all feel like they had some kind of role in it. This was sort of viewed as almost unprecedented because there had never been a case where even going back to Andrew Johnson, there had been Congress enacted a committee to investigate impeachment of Andrew Johnson, and that was sort of considered one of the most slapdash efforts ever. But in this case, the speaker just unilaterally declared it. That didn't fly well. Eventually, under pressure, she decided to put it up for a vote. Halloween Day, actually, oddly enough, and you got approval on a party line vote, basically, in the House for an impeachment inquiry into Trump. But it was handled badly, and through this whole course, that's when she gave it after that Halloween vote to Schiff. Schiff pretty much handled it entirely. First they had it entirely in the skiff, which for where it was entirely secret, and some folks might remember Matt Gaetz knocking on the door, but there were a lot of people who were upset about how secret this was. I interviewed some few congressmen in the book Abuse of Power about what was happening in the skiff and in those secret meetings, those secret hearings. So there's some interesting things that happen there too, with Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and so forth, and in which he sort
Please
of
tell us
questioned.
about that.
Yeah. Vindman sort of questioned whether the president sets foreign policy or not, and during the skiff meeting. Now he was a little bit more prepared once this came above ground and once it was televised. But I even think that's part of the problem with the permanent bureaucracy, be it the Pentagon or other agencies. I think probably much worse than most other agencies. But there's this view that the elected branch is just kind of, they come and go, but the permanent bureaucracy stays in place and they really run Washington. And that's what was sort of clear in this case. And as much as anything, that's why Trump was hated. He was the disruptor. And he came in to challenge the swamp, being the permanent bureaucracy and the lobbyists and so forth that ran Washington. I've actually said in the past that Trump, he may not be Jefferson Smith and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but he might be the Eddie Murphy character in Distinguished Gentleman.
Right.
But he kind of has to understand the underbelly to
Right.
the corruption.
Okay, Fred, we have a couple of minutes left. I had a quick question, but it's not about the book, actually, because you're very, very well connected. You know what's going on in Washington. How much longer does this honeymoon go for? Joe Biden is hiding, because I call him Hiding Biden. We know that many of his cabinet members went up to the southern border this past weekend, and according to Jen Psaki, they're set to meet with him sometime this week to discuss it with him. At some point, it's going to be revealed that he's just not an acting president. They pull him out for a couple of comments to sign an executive order, but at some point, everything is going to be exposed. When do you see this happening, and then what happens after that?
Well, he is supposed to have a press conference at some point. I am curious as to see how long the press conference will be, and how many questions he takes. If he has to have a teleprompter during the press conference. We saw a little bit about that during the campaign. He was taking these remote, and he was getting basically fed answers by some other people, by his staff. So that's going to be, he is going to be really measured on this. And at the same time, I think Kamala Harris is a very ambitious person, and she has her allies. If you look at the cabinet, if that's where we're going with this in the 25th Amendment, it is mostly Joe Biden allies. There are a few Kamala Harris people in there, like Sara, that have been picked, but for the most part, Tony Blinken, Secretary of State,
Susan Rice.
Right. These folks are allies to Biden. They're loyalists to Biden. I think on some level, that's why they were picked. I mean, the president's always going to pick loyalists to some degree, but I think it was more critical in this case because he knows that there are these issues that will eventually come up, and I think that they're going to keep them under wraps as long as possible.
Right, Fred. Thank you for joining us on the Definitive Wrap. This has been amazing, informative, and I urge our listening audience to please go get that book, order it, go to Amazon, order that book.
What's the name of the book again, Bela?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
sure
it's
thing.
called it's called Abuse of Power by Fred Lucas.
Campaign to impeach Donald Trump.
Right, and it's a great buy on Amazon or any other.
Barnes and Noble.
Terrific.
So thank you again for joining us, and thank you to our listening audience for tuning in. And we express our appreciation for vinnews.com for being their official podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to The Definitive Wrap with your hosts, Bela Sebro and Alan Skorsky. Be sure to tell your family and friends they also can listen to The Definitive Wrap on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, and your favorite streaming service. See you next time on The Definitive Wrap.